Welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about the Iran war as far as the United States, Israel, and their strategies are in defeating what they set out to accomplish in Iran and to move forward into the possibilities of what could occur if this war is prolonged and is carried out over multiple years, months, or even multiple years. So without further ado, we're just going to hop into it, and here we go. We are now at a moment in Iran where the battlefield is no longer just defined by missiles and drones. It's defined by strategy, restraint, and the looming question of nuclear escalation. What began as targeted strikes, proxy clashes, and regional retaliation has evolved into high-stakes confrontation involving not just Iran and Israel, but the United States as a central power balancing the deterrence with containment. The conversation has shifted dramatically in recent weeks to one of the most dangerous possibilities on the table: direct strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities. Israel's strategy has been clear and consistent and rooted in a doctrine it has followed for decades: preventing a hostile regional power from acquiring nuclear weapons and the capability at almost any cost. From the Ozark reactor strike in Iraq in 1981 to operations in Syria years later, Israel has demonstrated a willingness to act preemptively. In this current conflict, Israeli leadership appears focused on degrading Iran's long-term strategic capacity, not just retaliating for the immediate attacks, but eliminating the infrastructure tied to missile production. Revolutionary Guard command structures and, most controversially, nuclear development sites. For Israel, the calculation is existential. A nuclear-capable Iran is viewed not as a manageable rival, but as an unacceptable threat. The United States, however, operates under a far more complex strategic framework. Washington's priority is deterrence without triggering regional explosion. While the U.S. has provided military support and intelligence coordination and defensive assets to protect Israel and the U.S. bases in the region, the approach appears calibrated. Limited escalations protect global energy flows and avoid a direct, prolonged ground conflict. Striking nuclear facilities inside of Iran carries enormous consequences, and it could unify Iranian domestic support behind the hardliners, justify full-scale retaliation across the region through the proxy militias in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen, and potentially drag American forces into sustained conflict. The debate over striking the nuclear facilities is not simply about military feasibility. It is about the aftermath. Iran's nuclear infrastructure is deeply fortified and dispersed. A limited strike might delay the capability but not eliminate it. A comprehensive strike could trigger regional war, and Iran's response option range from missile saturation attacks on Israel to strikes on United States bases to attempts to disrupt the Straits of Hormuz, which is a choke point critical to the global oil supply. Even temporary closures would spike global energy prices and strain the European and Asian economies and test American political resolve at home. For Iran, the implications are both dangerous and paradoxical. Militarily, its conventional forces are outmatched by the combined strength of U.S. and Israel, but the asymmetry in Tehran's strength, proxy warfare, cyber attacks, maritime disruption, and political leverage across the Middle East gives Iran tools that don't require air superiority. However, if nuclear facilities are directly struck, Iran faces a pivotal decision which could escalate dramatically and risk regime survival, or absorb the blow and recalibrate internally, which is a direct attack on sovereign nuclear sites, which could really rally the nationalist support around the regime, even among the critics, strengthening hardliners in the short term. For Israel's success in degrading Iran's nuclear capability, it could deliver strategic relief, but at the cost of sustained retaliation. Missile barrages from Hezbollah in Lebanon could overwhelm the defenses, and civilian infrastructure could face unprecedented pressures. Israel's economy, already strained by the mobilization and reserve call-ups, could endure prolonged disruption. The Israelis' calculus hinges on whether decisive action now prevents a far worse future confrontation under the nuclear shadow. Now, for the United States, the stakes are broader and more complex. They are drawn-out regional war, which strain military readiness and inflate defense expenditures, at destabilize global markets and deepen the domestic political divisions as well. The American forces across the Middle East would remain high-value targets, and energy shocks would ripple through the inflation and supply chain alliances that would be tested. NATO partners wary of the escalation in the Gulf states balancing between Washington and Tehran, and the global powers like China and Russia are observing the opportunities in the instability. The most devastating outcome of the United States' interests would not necessarily be a single large strike. It would be prolonged entanglement and a slow-burning regional war with no clear end state. Escalation across multiple fronts, a persistent threat environment that forces expanded troop presence, maritime insecurity, global oil disruptions, and political fatigue at home. This is a strategic nightmare scenario, not just a war fought with weapons, but one fought with time and resources and the national cohesion. Which ultimately brings us to the central question: how does this end? A rapid contained conflict, limited objectives, and controlled retaliation, back-channel diplomacy offers the least damaging path forward. Prolonged escalation benefits no one except the hardliners on all sides. If the nuclear facilities are struck and de-escalation channels, they must immediately follow. They are not a deterrent. They must be reinforced with the crossing the red lines that trigger uncontrollable retaliation. The longer this war stretches, the more unpredictable it becomes, and unpredictability in a region this volatile carries consequences that extend far beyond the Middle East. The United States has interest not simply in winning battles, but in preventing a generational regional war that reshapes our global stability. Wrapping this conflict quickly, decisively, and strategically may not satisfy every objective in the short term, but it may be the only way to prevent the outcome that could prove far more devastating in the long run. I want to thank you once again for tuning in to the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. We will see you in the next speech. Thank you, and peace.